Here's some general tips and ideas from psychologists on how to reduce anxiety. So this is general things, it's not necessarily specific to interviews and can be used in maybe a variety of situations for you, and some I use myself all the time. One that I do use all the time is taking deep breaths. Kind of just as simple as, right? Just breathe in deeply and real deeply, hold it for a second, and then breathe out. And just do that a couple times. Not quick, that'll make you hyperventilate, but just a deep breath and let it out. You see athletes do that actually all the time. Maybe before they're gonna, do something on the field, they'll take a deep breath if they have that moment. So it works very well for a variety of situations, and particularly for interviewing. So that's one thing they do. I would certainly recommend that. Another thing to do is accept that you're anxious. I mean, sometimes you're like, what's going on? Why do my hands clammy? Why do I feel sweaty? Like, accept oh, I'm anxious, I'm nervous. And understand the situation you're in. And maybe it is a job interview. And it's like, well, of course people are nervous in job interviews. And I accept that I'm nervous, at least a little bit. Maybe I have some excitement behind that and turn that nervousness into positive energy and positive excitement, and you'll do much better. Just recognize, yeah, this is a nervous situation. I'm a little nervous, but I'm going to be great, and you'll be fine. Realize that your brain is also playing tricks on you. And what the psychologists mean by that is symptoms that happen from nervousness and from your brain telling you that, hey, you're nervous, you're anxious, causes physical things in your body. Sweating, cold or sweaty hands, or those types of things. Or it might cause you to have some weird body motions like this, or rubbing your hands together, whatever it might be. Things that you don't want to do in an interview. And just accept oh, that's just my brain telling me, it's kind of tricking me out here, saying, oh, you're anxious, so now you must act this way. Just tell your brain hey, I know what you're doing. You're trying to play a trick on me, and start using some things. I'll just take a deep breath, or I'll use some positive imagery, or I'll feel confident because I've been successful before, and that'll help reduce those types of things that you might see. And kind of question your thoughts too. You might be thinking, oh, I'm nervous. It's an interview. I'm nervous. And just question that and say, yeah, I've been nervous, but there's been times in interviews where I've been great. Or maybe in other facts of your life you've been great, maybe with a speaking engagement, or just talking with different team members, or working on a project. Could even be something you're doing yourself. Recognize that you've been great before and pull that into. So don't kind of question your thoughts on well, why should I be nervous? I don't have to be at least this nervous. And now that I've taken maybe this course here, I'm less nervous anyways. I know some tips, some tricks. So just question your thoughts around that. Another thing is to use calming visualization. I like that positive mental imagery, that visualization where you see yourself succeeding. So you can do that. I like that part. I like to see myself succeeding. But otherwise, just use some calming visualization to help reduce anxiety in any area. Maybe a calm place you've been in. A lot of people say, going to my happy place. If you've ever heard that expression. Maybe it's on a beach or in a quiet foresty area, or maybe at home just relaxing, reading a book, and you can imagine yourself doing that activity, which involves a lot of relaxation and a lot of calmness and stillness by it, and that'll help reduce your overall anxiety. Another thing psychologists will talk about is being an observer without judgment, basically stepping out of your own skin and looking at yourself and saying, okay, I recognize that I may be a little emotional here. I might be a little anxious, okay, I see this in myself. I've seen this in other people. No judgment on that. Just recognize that's what's going on and start doing some things to, be better with that, or help at least reduce that anxiety. Such as things like positive self-talk, right? Where you're just basically telling yourself, what, I'm great. I can do this job. I looked at the job description. I know my background. I know what I can contribute to this organization. I'm great. They just need to discover that. That's all they need to do is discover how great I am and how much I can help them. Once they do, they'll love me. That's some positive self-talk that really is all real. If you've done some of the prep and some of the things we talked about in the course, you'll feel more positive going into an interview. There's always going to be a little bit of nervousness to it. I get it. It's not a cure-all, but it'll help you to be much, much better and be great. So use that positive self-talk. And then focus on the right now as well, too. Focus on what you're doing right now. Sometimes people get really anxious about interviews that might be coming up in maybe a few hours or maybe in a day or two. They just work up that whole emotion, work up that whole anxiety. Just focus on what you're doing at that moment. Maybe playing with children, maybe doing another work project, maybe it's reading a book, whatever it might be. Just focus on what you're doing right now, and not thinking ahead to about the anxiousness that might come when the interview or some other stressful type of situation comes. And just focus on what you're doing right now. And then focusing on meaningful activities, that you're not thinking about oh, what could go wrong? What are all these bad things? Oh, if I don't do well in this interview, I won't get the job, and then I'll never get a job, and then I'll be out on the streets, and it'll be terrible, and I'll hate myself, and I'll hate my life. And people really build these things up into these big negative things. It's not unusual. It's very common, actually. And to really focus focus on the meaningful activities of like, yeah, I'll be doing this interview and I'll do good, but if I don't, you know what, there's always the next interview. And then I keep going and I keep going, and if I get rejected and I have many no's, well, I tell you what, those no's will eventually lead to the one yes that I need to get the great job, to get the great job offer. So here's a little rundown on some things, from psychologists talking about some of the things I use, some of the things you might want to try and use, and this is good for any situation where you might feel a little nervous or anxious, and certainly job interviews can be that way. And my hope is now that you've gone through pretty much all the course here, that you've learned some tips that will help you with this, but here's some extra tips from a psychologist. They'll say, hey, here's some things you can do in an anxious situation. I like the deep breath one, by the way, myself.